It's my pleasure to announce our next speaker. He's from Ottawa. He's the NDP MPP for Ottawa Centre. Thank you. He is a little pressed for time, so if we can just keep it down. I'm going to give the floor to Joel Harden.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? Est-ce qu'il y a du monde ici qui parle français aussi? OK, on peut parler un peu français aussi, mais il n'y a pas de traduction, hein? OK, donc on peut continuer en tête carrée. That was an inside joke for my French friends. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, as I always say in this town and in this territory, to the Algonquin people for the opportunity to be a guest on this land, to grow up in these areas. So the Algonquin peoples are the indigenous peoples of these territories. And Sean and I go back a long way. Sean, who works for you guys, and he knows that territorial recognition for me is not just something I like to do as a white person, as somebody who's read a little bit about this country that I'm proud to be a citizen of, but I also like the way it forces me as a politician to begin on a note of acknowledging where you are. I spoke French as well. Il y a beaucoup de monde ici, au ville d'Ottawa, qui parle français à son premier langue, la langue maternelle. C'est la langue maternelle, je crois que presque 30%, almost 30% of the people who live in our city are French speakers. So, Sean asked me to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I'm into as a politician, some of the big debates that are going on in our country for unions. I know it's not your union, and I mean no disrespect by it, but I wore my union's t-shirt today. For many years I was a CUPE member, and it's one labor movement family we have in this country. And you may have heard that the premier of this province may be compelling school board caretakers and secretarial staff out on strike on Monday. So this is being recorded, so out of respect, CUPE members, this is for you. And I dare say there's a premier of this province who has grown up without having to strive for very much, a guy who grew up with his daddy's company, born on third base, who's about to get a lesson given to him by caretakers and secretaries in this province. Mark my words, if these imbeciles can't figure out a way to get a deal before Monday, my community, this community, will be supporting caretakers and secretaries on picket lines, public schools across this city, across this province. No doubt about it.
Where's the nearest picket line?
Not up until midnight Sunday night, from my understanding, but probably operational 6 a.m. Monday morning. You guys still here?
Yes.
Ooh.
Where's the nearest physical picket
Okay,
line?
Sean and I are connected to each other. I think you have my cell, right? Yeah. All right, so I will let you know. Room full of troublemakers, I have to let you know. Okay, so my spouse I'm married to a hospital worker, so my spouse got called away this afternoon, so my wonderful kids are here with me, Adele and Emery. I think Emery's playing Pokemon Go here somewhere. He's chasing, there, he's actually in the room. Great. Nice to have the kids here. And I thought what I could do to maybe impart some of my journey to you as a union activist who became a politician is tell you a little bit about my own personal journey and where I see things right now insofar as what I'd welcome you to consider in the work you're already doing, working for members, and helping to push our politics in the right direction. Yes, I am a New Democrat. Absolutely. I got elected as an NDP member here. Oh, thank you. I don't make the assumption everybody in this room is, though. So what I'd like the next maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes to be an opportunity for you to tell you my story about how I got here, and an invitation to you, if you're not already doing it, to consider the federal election as your opportunity to deliver a message to people in my profession to do better, however you decide to do that. Does that sound good? All right. Thank you. All right. So I have a picture up here, which is my picture of juxtaposing premiers in the province of Ontario. So on the left is, people recognize him? Bob Ray, yeah. Pardon me? Okay, fair. And on his right is Premier Mike Harris. So in between these two premiers gives you a little sense of my journey into this profession. So I was the first person in my family to go to university. I'm from a tiny town an hour's drive from here towards the Quebec border, a town called Vankleek-Hill. If you've ever drank a beer called Beau's, okay, that's from my town. 2,000 people, maybe 300 cows, it's a small place. So I went to university, the first person in my family, felt a lot of pressure to do as well as I could. And when I went to school, the guy on the left was the premier of this province. And what I was told when I was in university was that the government, my government, I was inclined to be supporting the NDP at the time, would be increasing tuition fees by 18%. And I didn't like that, not one little bit, because I said to myself, wait a sec. My grandmother and grandfather told me to get an education, whether it was skilled trades or college or university, to do something with myself in my post-secondary learning so I could set an example they wanted to continue with my children. So fair enough, but then I asked myself, well, I've been lucky, I had some support. What about people coming after me? So I was frustrated with an NDP government, if I'm candid to you, when I started off thinking about politics. So when I left where I went to school first, which was Kingston, I went to Toronto, which is 1995, and that was when the Conservatives under Mike Harris took power. And that was an interesting moment for me, thinking about politics, because the formative years in my life, when I was 2 to 10, were spent living in poverty. My mom's first marriage ended. We lived in Toronto. We moved back to Vankleek-Hill to live with my grandparents, very working class people, not a lot of money, but a lot of love and a lot of support through their church. And that's how we got by. But I remember difficult nights. I remember my mom being upset about not being able to pay bills. And I remember being on Ontario Works, aka welfare, in this province for 5 years. And I remember the stigma associated with that. I remember being teased at school. And I will never forget it. It's a reference point for me. So the first thing the premier on the right did when he got into power in September 1995 was cut welfare benefits by 21.6%. So there I am in Toronto, all the expectations on me to do well in school, study hard, get those scholarships, so on and so forth. But here's a government that makes an announcement that basically takes a fifth of a poor person's income off their monthly balance sheet. I couldn't concentrate. I was up at night. I was having these recurring nightmares about imagining food disappearing from my grocery, my pantry, in the apartment where my brother and my mom and I lived. And I just got mad, I'll be honest with you. It was beyond reason. So I think I had green hair and red Doc Martens at the time. Had we met yet, Sean? I can't remember. Might have done. And I walked into my seminar, and I can't even remember what the professor was talking about, but afterwards, all the students, we entered in the hallway, and I said, I'm going down to the legislature. I'm going down to look at this Mike Harris guy from the gallery, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something, because I'm mad. I'm really, really mad that it's become a sport. Beating up on poor people is, first of all, it's okay to make fun of people who are on welfare, and second of all, that this guy can get away with it. I don't want him to get away with it. Who wants to come with me? So I talked a couple people into coming with me, and I went down and ended up at the legislature. It was question period. The premier got a question, stood to speak, and I just stood up and I started yelling at the guy. I don't even remember what I said. I think it was something like, why are you picking on poor people? Nobody wants to be on welfare. Do you know a single person who's lived for years on welfare? Do you have any sense of what it's like for them to live their life? And this really nice gentleman came up to me and he grabbed my shoulder and let me go for about a minute, He said, "You done?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I'm done." And he took me away. He took me to a holding cell in the basement. Somewhere in the basement. I was there for like 45 minutes, and I got up, and door opened. There were all these cameras, because, Queen's Park, it's full of reporters, right? And they're like, "Who are you, and why'd you do this?" And I was like, holy crap, I didn't know I was signed up for this. But apparently, according to my friends who worked with me then, that was one of my first big public steps in politics, right? But as I told you to begin with, I was, despite the fact of being an NDP voter, I was a bit of a discouraged NDP voter. So not long after that, there's a story I have to tell to join to that yelling at Mike Harris story. Not long after that, Jack Layton came to my university. Jack Layton and Olivia Chow, actually, was partner of Olivia Chow. They both came up to York. And we listened to a presentation where they said, we're going to go to the mayor of Toronto, Mel Lastman. Everybody remember Mel Lastman? Character. And we're going to make the fiscal case to end homelessness because the mayor's a conservative. We feel we can make the ethical case all we want. We want to make the financial case. We want to tell them that if someone is homeless, that means they're interacting with police, they're interacting with first responders, they're interacting with hospitals, they're interacting with public services, jails that cost infinitely more. That if we found a way to get people housing and supportive care, whether it's mental health care, addictions care, whatever trauma they're living with, whatever bad luck they've had that put them on the street, let's focus on that, Jack said. And let's make the financial case. Let's not just make the lefty case for it. Let's speak right to the heart of a conservative. And I'm from Vankleigh-Kill. I'm from a small town, pretty conservative. Raised by Presbyterian grandparents, whom I loved, right? Politically, we are not on the same page. But I listened to Jack and I said, wow, this guy sounds a little out there, but why not? So I went down to City Hall and I saw not only Jack and Olivia speak, I saw a whole roster of people who had been homeless speaking to the mayor, and I think he could only stand about 10 minutes. The guy has an attention span of a squirrel, right? So he had a bunch of staff in there, and they listened, and they kind of started the meeting, like this, like my friends in the military, correct posture, they were like, you're not going to budge me, you commie, like it was like that. Then after a while, as every single person who had been on the street spoke, you could see their shoulders. It was hitting them right in the feels. It was hitting them right here. And they were hearing the economics of the argument, and you could see Olivia and Jack were getting to them. And that was the moment, if I could pinpoint it, that I started believing in politics again. I stopped being a cynic, and I started realizing that either I could take an interest in politics, or politics would continue to get the wrong side of me, right? Whether it was welfare cuts or tuition hikes or whatever the case may be. I had to take an interest. I had to take an active interest. So I went on and I raised money for Jack, and I ran around Toronto, tried to be a troublemaker like all you, right? But I came to, I don't know if we can do it on the next slide, I came to understand after about many years of work in doing that there were different models of leadership that I'd put on the table for you to consider in politics. One I was very familiar with. It's the one on the left that says, I'm the leader. I'm the expert. I'm the politician. I'm here to earn your vote and then just go away for 3-4 years. I'll make the decisions for you, right? I didn't like that model, not one little bit. It certainly was never the way Jack acted with me. It was never the way in which politicians who I thought were compelling acted, but it was very common in the profession, common among professors too. But the other model, which is this one in the middle, I encountered a lot on campuses. And it's the complete flip side of that idea of I'm the expert and I'm the leader. It's we're all leaders. There's no leaders here. Everybody's autonomous, everybody's doing their own thing. We got to reject leadership. And the more I grappled with that approach to politics, the more frustrated I got. Because what ended up happening was that they actually were natural leaders in given groups. They just weren't accountable to anybody. They could make whatever decision they wanted, and no one could actually figure out how to make any accountability happen with this person. So that drove me nuts on campuses. Sean can tell you, for years. Whether it was, work that I did in anti-poverty with Jack and Olivia, work I did in the anti-war movement, leading up to the war in Iraq. I did a lot of organizing with former soldiers who had come to Canada to avoid service in the Iraq War, Americans. But it drove me nuts when, someone would say, oh, well, no, I'm not the leader, but I've made all the decisions already. Like, damn, I can't handle this. So I started realizing in politics there might be another way to do leadership. And that's what I'd invite you to consider today. And it's called the snowflake model. What it means is we begin from the standpoint that on any given issue, there is natural leadership. And I bet you if I talked at every single one of your tables, I would find out that each one of you has leadership qualities to bring on any given issue that would make me look puny. I know it. Like whether it's health and safety or stuff that goes on in your workplace, your neighborhood, everyone in this room is a natural leader. The question is, how do we not think that one person has to be leader for everything all the time? How do we find the natural leaders, rotate that leadership model, delegate it out, so it's more of a recycled model of leadership? that's accountable, still accountable, right? Rather like I would like to think good unions function. You have an executive board, absolutely. But how strong is an executive board without a strong steward's body at the local level? Not very strong at all, right? So the snowflake model of leadership is what I personally believe in after about 20 years of troublemaking. And if there's someone who represents it to me, it's this guy. It's this guy. So he had a heart attack. He had a heart attack 2 days ago, you may have seen. But he is back at it. And let me tell you about this guy. I reached out to him a few years ago, and I said, I'm being pushed by friends of mine to run for office up here, and if it ever happens, could I please pick your brain? I never got a hold of Bernie himself, but I got a hold of people he works with, strategists he worked with. They came up in March before I ran as a candidate in this riding in June 2018, and we put on an event they call a barnstorm. I'm not sure if anybody's heard about this political organizing tactic, but basically what it means, if we were to do one in this room, I'd rev you up on whatever issue was going on in the community, and then we would just throw it wide open and say, who wants to do an event to phone bank, to door knock, to organize, to fundraise, to gather all the data from that stuff? And he built this organizing model, which was based around an average financial contribution of $27 per person. Think about that. In a country like the United States, where massive wealth is so concentrated with these huge super PAC lobbies that had controlled politics there for decades, Bernie built an organizing model based on barnstorming across the United States. And as of right now, in the campaign in which he's involved in right now to be the Democratic nominated candidate for president, he's raised $40 million. It's above and beyond anybody else in the field. And it's this kind of model, delegated leadership. We'll move on to the next one. This is the next wave, the youth wave, coming up in the United States. Around this idea Sean wanted me to mention, the notion of a Green New Deal. That for Adele and Emery's generation, we either start thinking now about how we build a green economy, or we will get left behind. If you look at countries like China, which is the butt of many of Donald Trump's jokes, 9 out of every 10 windmills built in the world right now are being built in China. It is a country shrouded in smog with major problems, but they are embracing renewable energy, unlike us. Canada, if you look at the richest countries in the world, we have the most emissions per capita per person of anywhere else in the world because our leaders, including people in my party, I will be honest, are stuck in old thinking. Stuck in old thinking. We think for some reason we have to decide between the needs of energy workers, who I love, and environmentalists. And what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is saying in the United States is we do not have to make that choice. Energy workers in the oil sands, in Saskatchewan, in Newfoundland and Labrador, and environmentalists have to come together. We have to come together with a vision that Franklin Roosevelt had in this particular country in the 30s, but how do we put our entire economy back to work? So countries like the Netherlands in Europe have decided that you will not be able to buy a fossil fuel car in that country after the year 2025. And they've set a goal of electrifying all forms of transport, commercial and personal, by 2030. That's bold. Here in Canada, we're debating about a crappy carbon tax that ends up getting recycled back to consumers and opts out most of the major polluters of the country. That's how behind we are. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. If we move on to the next slide. Things are starting to change here. And they're starting to change because, a formerly green-haired guy like me got convinced by students I used to work with at Carleton University to run for office. And I was inspired by this guy in particular too. Jeremy Corbyn, who came within a hair of being Prime Minister of the UK. And pay attention, because the bumbling ass they have in power there now may yet be replaced. Boris Johnson. Yeah, good Lord. So Jeremy Corbyn built a similar model to what Bernie established in the United States. Very grassroots, very delegated, based not about telling voters what the right solutions, but listening to people, inspiring them, and inviting them to join the movement. Biggest return for the Labour Party since 1945. On to the next slide. I want to introduce you to my colleague in Britain who does the same job I do here in Ontario. I have the honor to be the critic for people with disabilities in Ontario, accessibility. So this is Marcia de Cordova. Marcia's story is that as a black woman, she was the first black candidate to ever run in this riding of Battersea in England. The Labour Party was so messed up that not only did they not believe Marcia could win, they didn't give her a single thin dime of support from the Central campaign. She built everything up herself with 300 or 400 volunteers. And she not only beat the Conservative incumbent there, she beat the person by over 4,000 votes. So she came here to Ottawa back in March before the election, when the Bernie people were here too, and she told her story, and it lit people up. It lit people with disabilities in this town to see a partially sighted woman getting up and saying, you can get active in politics too. Holy cow. Lit the room up. And then she knocked apartment buildings with us in the downtown here of Ottawa, in Centretown, talking to people living in social housing who feel ignored. It was electric. On to the next slide. And as much as we hear a lot about Mr. Trump, check this out. This woman. Do anybody know who this woman is? Les amis québécoises? Ça, c'est Valérie Plante, mayor of Ottawa. Okay? On the day of the mayor of Montreal. What was I thinking? I'm too Ottawa-centric. Mayor of Montreal. So on the day of the big climate strike protests you probably saw recently last Friday, it was this woman, it was the mayor of Montreal that declared on that day that public transit in the city of Montreal was free. Free. She wants to move towards that model of removing fares from public transit because she wants to encourage us and to figure out ways to get us onto the bus, to get us onto the subway, to get us onto the regional rail. And she and I have very similar backgrounds. I have been a community organizer for 20 years. Valérie was a community organizer for 20 years. So you don't have to be a lawyer or a banker or an accountant, with all due respect to those professions, to be a politician. You can be a regular person too. And might not only win a local seat, you might become mayor of one of our major cities in the country. We don't talk about her story enough. Particularly in English Canada, we don't talk about her story enough. Okay, sorry guys. So this is a picture of Adele and Emery and me at the CLC convention a few years ago. I used to work for the Canadian Labour Congress as a researcher on pensions. And I was working with friends of mine who were on this leaflet to promote a vision of a completely different economy. The vision was called the Elite Manifesto. And I just will never forget the coalition that particular vision brought around each other. Again, energy workers, environmentalists, Indigenous, youth, elders, disabled folks. It was exciting, right? So I refuse to believe that Canada's politics have to be boring. I refuse that. I know Quebec's politics aren't boring, as someone who lives on the border. But I refuse to believe our politics are boring. And then last but certainly not least, this is where we're at right now, where I'd just like to put a bookmark and take a few questions. I hope you kick the tires nice and hard, because I like that. This is Jagmeet Singh. You've all had to see what he's put up with, right? Whether he's at a farmer's market, in the Atwater market in Montreal, or whether he's holding a town hall in his hometown of Brampton, with people running up to him telling stop imposing Sharia law. The guy's a sick man, right? But you know what I found beautiful about this guy? Sorry, I'm trying to get choked up, but his reaction when people have targeted him with Islamophobic comments has not been to say, I'm not Muslim. His reaction has been to say, you got to leave hate behind. You got to leave that behind. And that means so much. His reaction to the whole brown face, black face thing, I just keep getting the messages from young people. They're like, the fact that he just didn't even talk about the Prime Minister. He said, you know, we've all made mistakes in our past. Fair enough. But I want to talk to black and brown kids. And I want you to know that you matter. Gotta say, straight up, even if you think I'm totally wrong, that reminds me a lot of one particular person. And it's the guy he's hugging right there. Tommy Douglas, straight out of Saskatchewan. Heart as big as anybody I've ever read about. Never met him, but I do know his descendants. You know, not just Kiefer, who's on television, Kiefer Sutherland, but Shirley Douglas and others. So I myself am a bleeding heart. I hold out hope that the media who has discounted us may yet be surprised that this election could be interesting after all. I spent the morning at Carleton University working the advanced poll where the students are, where I used to work. And I kept hearing from students, wow, this Jagmeet guy, interesting. I'd never heard of him before until the whole brown face, black face thing, and I just keep getting more and more impressed. So I'm not sure how that connects to what you're talking about at your convention here, what you're talking about in your workplace, but I will say this, there will be a big push in the media to tell you that this is about Coke or Pepsi. This is about the red team or the blue team. And then if you vote for anything other than the red team, you're supporting the blue team. And if you vote for anything other than the blue team, you're supporting the red team. Well, what I know here in Ottawa Centre is that this place does not put up with that kind of crap. We have elected progressive people from the Liberal and NDP for a long time here, for a long time. And I was the beneficiary, sorry, Sean. I was the beneficiary of that last summer. We were told you couldn't beat a Liberal cabinet minister. Joel, you seem like a nice guy. But the guy you're up against is a Liberal cabinet minister. You're not going to win. We won by 9,000 votes. On a snowflake organizing model, 9,000 votes, yes. If you applaud, you are applauding the movement, not me. So long story short, you can get it done. And do not, in my opinion, do not count this guy out. But what do you guys think? I have another 10 minutes before I have to take these guys to swim lessons. What do you think? Any thoughts? Yeah.
I just got, one comment there. You're right that we don't have to choose between like a green economy and jobs. But the problem is this, right?
Yeah.
In so many places in this country, like if you go to Fort McMurray, right? Mm-hmm. And you know who works in Fort McMurray? I'll tell you who works in Fort McMurray. Auto workers who no longer work in auto plants. Sure. Loggers who no longer log in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. Farmers who can't farm in Saskatchewan. Mm-hmm. Lobster trap mechanics from Cape Breton who, right? And then you say to them, hey, we're going to have this transition to a new economy. And they're there as a refugee from a previous economy, right? And they're doing okay. They don't believe it. Yeah. And you can, you can take Hamilton, Fort Mac, any industrialized place in this country, and the message. There's got to be more to the message. There's got to be some meat behind the message.
Sure. An acknowledgement of where they're at.
Hear you. And this is why I'm a big believer in this argument I have with my friends in the Green Party. I'm considered a pretty green New Democrat. I just prefer the term socialist for me. But if all we speak to are environmentalists in the urban areas, we are done. Because exactly those people are being sacrificed right now. A good friend of mine drives those huge dump trucks in Fort Mac. You know what's happening to them now? They're being automated.
Right, digitization.
The industry doesn't care about those workers. It doesn't care. But we do. And I think this was my argument with friends in the environmental movement. Stop slagging the workers. It is not about the workers. If we have to have a vision. This is what Bernie has. It's compelling. We have a vision to transform our economy, to put people back to work. Because a lot of them don't have jobs right now in Alberta. It's a big issue. That's why they're so adamant about the pipeline. I think the pipeline is going to get those jobs back. But the truth is, if you look at the research, the oil that we have in this country is extremely expensive to produce. Extremely. And the United States has remade its economy with fracked gas and oil, so they now can almost service themselves. So when we try to sell down there, they say, yeah, we'll take your oil at a 20 or 30% discount. That's the problem those folks have. So if you talk to my wife's side, a lot of family in Calgary. You talk to them, they'll sit down and they'll tell you, well, look, Joel, we live in a sun belt. This is the sunniest part of Canada. If we had a federal government willing to partner with industry and unions, we could solarize this province in no time. In fact, some of the companies are already doing it themselves. talking about our vision about how we finally ask the super wealthy in this country to pay their fair share of tax. Jagmeet's running on a wealth tax. You may have heard of this. If you have wealth of over $20 million, there will be a surtax on that wealth. We will gather that wealth. We will invest it in electrifying all forms of public transit, creating 500,000 units of affordable housing in this country. Talk about affordable housing in this city. It's ridiculous, or Toronto or Vancouver. Pharmacare, dental care, eye care, ear care. This is what the NDP believes in. And sorry, I'm going to take a shot at the red team, but unlike the Liberals, we're not going to lie to you about how we're going to pay for it. Look up the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. Look up those investigations. What will you find? You will find the current federal finance minister himself, Bill Morneau, who shelters through Morneau Sebeco a fair amount of wealth in the Caribbean. He deigns to take a seat in that building north of us, sit in that chair while starving personally our healthcare system and our education system of tax money. We pay our tax, but somehow, because he's important, he doesn't. I say enough of that. Enough of that. And do you know who I say that to? Not just my lefty friends in Ottawa. I'll go right to industrial towns, right to farming communities and say, you are being hosed. There's one rule for the rich, and there's one rule for the rest of us, and that's got to end. That's got to be over. Any other questions people may have? Yeah.
So the NDP party, they've never attained really federal power in this country. The best they've done is like second position.
We've been the official opposition.
So right now, the polls show that they're not doing as well. What could the NDP party be doing to gather more votes and be a contender for?
Yeah. Well, I'll be straight with you. I talked to Jagmeet's brother just the other day. I was mentioning this to people, and I just said, "Hey, man, one foot in front of the other. Your brother's he's locking the lights out. I want you to please tell him I'm hearing this from black and brown people in my community. They love him." And my mother, Liberal voter her whole life, calls me up and says, "My God, the way he dealt with that guy in the farmers market in Montreal was incredible." The NDP doesn't have a hope in hell of winning here, Joel, but I'm voting for the NDP person just because of that. So we got to be patient. And with Jack, if you think about what this country thinks about when the name Jack Layton is brought up, they're like, he could have been prime minister. I can be on a doorstep of a conservative home, they're like, we would have been proud for him to be our prime minister. Conservative home, it's happened to me. Took him 8 years to get there. Elected as leader in 2013, breakthrough election in 2011. The province of Quebec, the nation of Quebec, wrapped its arms around Jack. That's the reason we got official opposition. Let's be clear, right? Andrew Horvath, my leader, the province of Ontario. She's been in office for 10 years. We just had our breakthrough election. I honestly think we would have been the government if the Liberals didn't spend 2 weeks running anti-union ads. Did you say, right? So Andrea had her breakthrough. We had our shot. We will have another shot in 2022, and I believe in her chance to get us there. So Jagmeet's been, our leader for 18 months. And the national media just wants to keep writing this guy off. And when I saw him, he came through Ottawa with his bubbly, energetic personality thing, He sat down with me afterwards for a cookie because he and I both like cookies. And he said, "What do you think, Joel?" And I said, "I love it that they count you out. It means the Liberals will be lazy." Perfect. Let's keep working. Let's keep working. You do your thing, man. We got your back here. You don't have to visit us all the time. Like, we got resources. You get out to and then I saw him 3 days later because they have this rural festival in Ontario called the International Plowing Match. Super fun. Jagmeet's there plowing a furrow, It wasn't like the media said, people walking up saying, "Take your turban off." I didn't see one farmer do that. Not one person. My friend Charlie Angus from up north, when that New Brunswick thing happened, you see that? Where there was clearly a hatchet job of some kind, where somebody had cornered some folks who really weren't members of our party and wanted to go to the Greens. Fine, do your thing. But when they said that they were going to the Greens because they couldn't see themselves getting supported when their leader is a brown guy with a turban on his head, did you catch that? As a rural kid in my heart, I was like, who in the hell do you think you are? You're writing off every rural person as a racist? Seriously? Go to Elizabeth May. If that's what you think of the people where you live, get the heck out of our party. That's what I said. That's what Charlie said. And Jagmeet went around to that plowing match. People loved him because he's a nice guy. He's different than what they're used to, no doubt. Spice in life is good. Anybody else? Yeah, shoot, yeah.
In Europe, secondary education is free. Bernie Sanders promotes secondary education. And in our country, we're impoverishing our kids with huge debt to go to secondary education. I'm surprised that I've never read anything coming out to improve that.
So what we're running on in the federal campaign right now is moving towards free tuition. We're trying to be straight with Canadians because we haven't raised, and despite the wealth tax that we put on the table, we haven't raised enough money to eliminate all tuition fees within the first term of government, and we want to be honest about that. But we are talking about eliminating student loans. We're talking about moving all loans into grants. In Ontario, we're talking about nobody going to school with a debt at the end of their degree. That's what we campaign on at the moment. But I'm inspired by what you said, brother. That's where I would like to go.
What are your thoughts on proportional representation?
Well, my friend Rael's back there. He's the expert, and I'm a supporter. But I will not pretend to have this man's knowledge. But I will say in his presence that it's something I'm committed to fight for in our party. We need it because the red team, blue team, you must vote for me because Andrew Scheer will end the world. They will keep pulling this on us until we change our voting system.
Absolutely. We've all heard of this kind of dystopian vision of automation taking all the jobs. So, the science fiction vision of millions of people living in camps out of work, kind of. Yeah. You know what I mean? What's your take on that kind of? What's your take on the rise of automation and these proclamations?
Well, I'll admit to not having a nuanced take, but we have to figure. The old idea was that automation was going to help us have a leisure society, right? That it was going to help us not have to do drudgery work, that that's what the robots would do for us. But the more I see robots in capitalism, the more I just see of another way to scrape money off of workers. That's what it's been about, just running people out of jobs, not giving them more leisure time. People are stressed. The amount of, what's the latest number that Jagmeet was talking about? Something like 50% of the country living paycheck to paycheck. We have to socialize the benefits of automation. That's what I have heard from people I respect. I've heard people talk about a robot tax. We have to raise money off of this transition to make sure there is employment and there are services for people. Do I know a lot about it? I confess I don't, but in general, that's what I've said. Any other questions? Want to get news? Anybody who hasn't already asked one? Particularly sisters, because I haven't seen enough sisters. Yeah.
I'm interested in your thoughts on a basic income or guaranteed income. How do you think that might move us forward as a people and economically, or not? What do you think of it?
I'm glad you asked that question because when I was running for office and I would be asked that question, I would usually say, well, I look forward to reading the research and figuring out, because my friends in the anti-poverty community were fighting over this. People who fight for folks on Ontario Disability Support Program would say, Joel, don't agree to this basic income thing because it's a plot. They're trying to lower our benefits, right? And they had other friends saying, if we figured out a way to pilot this, there would never be, you've lived in poverty, Joel, you understand it. People would never have to live like that. So I am now been convinced that a basic income would be a fantastic idea. And it was a weird moment for me when I was at the legislature? I walked into this room with all these corporate guys. Happens a lot. And there they were, I thought selling insurance or something. I thought that's what it would be about. But they were selling basic income. It was a bunch of entrepreneurs, and they were basically saying, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to make a new company or a new idea, we love the idea of a basic income because you don't have the consequence of being in poverty if you take a risk to create something to get people jobs. So then I started thinking about it a little bit, and I said, oh, geez, this is something that has a huge resonance. But what the political class in our country clearly doesn't want is for the evidence to get out. We had 4 pilots going on in the province of Ontario, one in Hamilton, one in Thunder Bay, and I can't remember where the other 2 were going. 4,000 people who were Ontario Works or ODSP recipients who were receiving a basic income, could get decent apartments, decent food, had poverty taken, relatively speaking, off the table. And the Ford government pulled the plug on it. And when we challenged them on it, they said, oh, well, do you know what it would cost if we paid everybody a basic income? It would cost billions of dollars. And the food banks of our province came out with a report this week that said poverty costs our province $33 billion a year. Poverty, you know? So I say, everybody, I mean, I know there's exceptions to the rule. I know someone will always bring up that person you know who's lazy and living high off the whatever. I believe most people want to contribute. Most people want value. Most people want a shot. And if we have an abuse problem, it's the people who deduct their Raptors and Leafs tickets off their business income. I mean, think about this for a second before I run out the door. I'm a huge basketball fan, grew up playing the game. But every time I would look at the game on television and realize from StubHub or Ticketmaster or whatever that those tickets were costing in the courtside ones, like 18 grand a ticket. And then as a politician and a researcher, I realized, wait a sec, businesses can deduct 50% of the cost of that ticket from their business income. And then with some friends, I ran some numbers during game one of the finals and realized that we were losing, the province was subsidizing $45 million per game. Per game. And then we're in this big fight with the province about how do you make sure all buildings are accessible to people with disabilities. And I've been supporting all kinds of groups, and they're like, oh, well, we just launched a pilot program with the Rick Hansen Foundation for $1.3 million over 2 years. One game, $45 million. So I just kept throwing that back in their face. And I won't stop, you know? Because, I mean, the basic income point brings up a really important issue with our country, is that we have a lot of wealth. An enormous amount of, probably more wealth than our grandmothers and grandfathers could ever dream of. I step out of Union Station when I take the train to Toronto, I look up, I'm like, holy crap, look at this place, you know? But we got a wealth distribution problem. And we got some people that are living high off the hog, and we are subsidizing those yachts and Lamborghinis. We are subsidizing those lifestyles. For all of their talk about the welfare bum, I think about the corporate welfare bum. And I think we have to start figuring out who they are, how they're sponging off the public, and how that has to stop. When they come after your pensions or your benefits programs, we have to figure out a way to flip the script and say, wait a sec, the people we can't afford anymore are the employers. And the way they lavish themselves with their individual pension plans, you know, and all of the consultants that they hire. So I want to get back to that conversation of a decent standard of living for everyone. Because I don't know, I think that when my grandfather came back from fighting Nazis, you know, disabled, I figured that's what his generation sacrificed for, you know. I want to thank you for the honor to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Wow. Sean, you were right. You were right.
I know, he's great.
Thank you so much.